If first contact happened the way we expected, it would be loud, a beacon, a greeting, a golden record from the stars. But first contact didn't arrive like that. It arrived like an error. A perfect notch taken out of static, so brief and so clean you could miss it if you blinked. And then, as if embarrassed to exist, it vanished. In 2037, the world's radio telescopes had been stitched into a single instrument on the far side of the Moon, the Lunar Far-Side Array. Thousands of antennas spread across crater rims and basalt plains, linked by fiber and timing signals, turning kilometers of lunar regolith into one silent ear. The Moon's far side was chosen for one reason: Earth's radio noise can't reach it. No broadcasts, no radar sweeps, no accidental emissions. If something artificial appeared there, it wouldn't be ours. Dr. Hannah Myrick led signal analysis for the array. She was the kind of scientist who trusted patterns more than people, raised in a coastal city that lost half its shoreline to sea rise, where denial had always been the real catastrophe. She specialized in distinguishing real astrophysics from instrumentation ghosts, because in radio astronomy you don't see objects, you infer them from waves that have crossed light years. Elias Kwan maintained the array's timing backbone: atomic clocks, phase references, synchronization links. Before the Moon, he'd worked on deep space navigation where a nanosecond error can throw a probe millions of kilometers off course. Elias believed time was the only witness that couldn't be bribed. Major Leo Serrano represented Quiet Services, a multinational security coalition formed after the first AI wars, when nations learned that information could detonate societies faster than bombs. Leo had watched countries collapse over lies. He feared what might happen over truth. The detection began as a narrow line on a waterfall plot: frequency against time, too thin, too stable, too deliberate. Hannah's first instinct was interference, because narrowband signals are almost always human. But the Moon's far side doesn't get human interference. That was the point. The line hovered near 1.420 GHz, the hydrogen line. SETI researchers had stared at that quiet region for decades because hydrogen is universal. Any civilization that knows radio astronomy knows hydrogen, and the band around hydrogen and hydroxyl, the waterhole, is a logical place to transmit. Nature doesn't produce razor-thin, phase-stable tones like a laser pointer. When you see one, you assume intention. Hannah flagged it, then called Elias, because on the Moon the difference between discovery and delusion is timing. The array used interferometry. It combined signals from antennas spread kilometers apart and compared time of arrival differences down to nanoseconds. If a signal arrived at slightly different times across the array, you could triangulate where it came from in the sky. If it appeared everywhere at once, it was a local artifact. Elias pulled the timing logs, aligned streams, and watched the delays line up into a clean solution. The source was not in the array. It was not on the Moon. It was outside the solar system. And there was more than a tone. Buried inside the carrier were tiny phase shifts, micro-taps on the wave's timing. Hannah fed it through every decoder SETI had ever used: binary assumptions, prime number checks, common error correction templates. It didn't match human standards, but it had structure, redundancy, repetition, the kind of compressibility that random noise never has. It felt less like a greeting and more like a handshake, the start of a protocol waiting for a partner. 2 hours later a lunar shuttle landed, and the people who stepped out didn't look like scientists. Major Leo Serrano walked in with a sealed order: all data exports frozen, all logs quarantined, all personnel confined. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He produced a signature Hannah had only heard whispered: continuity directive, a classified emergency clause designed for one thing: suppress information deemed capable of destabilizing civilization. Hannah argued that you couldn't embargo physics. Elias demanded to know what authority could override immutable observatory logs. Leo told them they had done their jobs. Now they would stop touching what they'd found. And then the signal disappeared. Not from the sky. From their systems. The waterfall plot showed only noise. The logs, right once optical storage, mirrored across nodes, protected by cryptographic hash chains, were spotless. The night's data looked as if it had never existed. Hannah and Elias remembered the line, remembered the phase taps, remembered the chilling clarity of something intelligent arriving on a frequency humans had long agreed to watch. But the array's memory was clean, like a crime scene scrubbed so thoroughly it became its own evidence. That should have been impossible. Hash chains are designed so that if you edit a single bit, every subsequent block breaks. Tampering leaves a scar. Yet Hannah found no scar. What she found was worse: continuity. A chain rebuilt so perfectly that the cleaned version looked like the only version that had ever been written. It felt like being gaslit by reality. Elias, unable to tolerate that kind of impossibility, dug into the timing diagnostics. If the data had been falsified, something had to control what the array believed it heard and when. In interferometry, the clock is the spine. Distort the clock and you can warp a sky map, smear a signal, fabricate a source. Elias found a hidden channel, an unauthorized time reference briefly injected into the synchronization network during the detection window. A ghost clock. It wasn't theirs. For a short period, the array had been slaved to an external timebase. Not a crude spoof that introduced noise, but a precise replacement that maintained consistency while rewriting history. It didn't simply corrupt the observation, it made a substitute observation and sealed it into the record. Hannah remembered a forgotten detail from the array's engineering: a rolling raw buffer kept for calibration. Too large to archive permanently, it stored uncleaned data for a few days before recycling, isolated from the main ledger and often ignored because it was temporary. If someone had rebuilt the official chain, they might not have bothered with the buffer. Hannah and Elias slipped into a maintenance bay, accessed the dormant module, and pulled the raw buffer. There it was. The signal, preserved in unprocessed form. Proof the night had happened. Proof that the clean archive was a lie. And when Hannah peeled apart the modulation carefully this time, she found a second layer she hadn't seen before, something nested under the handshake like a watermark. She decoded it and felt her stomach drop. It wasn't alien math. It was Earth math, an old error-correcting code used in early deep space probes, publicly documented decades ago. The kind of encoding you'd choose if you wanted to be understood by humans who had built radios and spacecraft. The alien signal contained a human signature, which meant either something out there had learned our language, or someone here had wrapped a message in something we'd instinctively trust. And buried in that implication was a more disturbing realization: if this was a reply, then we weren't the first to speak. We had been broadcasting radio leakage for a century: radar pings, television carriers, navigation beacons spilling into space like a foghorn in the dark. The signal felt like someone had heard us and answered, not with poetry, but with protocol. They confronted Leo in a narrow corridor of lunar alloy and recycled air. He didn't deny the erasure. Quiet Services had scrubbed the logs. He said it wasn't to hide aliens. It was to prevent escalation. If the world learned humanity was in a conversation, every nation would demand control of the microphone. They would embed threats, claims of sovereignty, demands for technology. They would turn contact into a weapon. Leo said he'd been created to stop that. Hannah asked the one question that cracked his composure: if Quiet Services erased the logs, how did they act so fast? 2 hours after detection, they were already on the moon. That wasn't response, that was anticipation. 3 nights later, the signal returned, stronger, wider, unmistakably structured. It wasn't narrowband now, it was spread spectrum, smeared across frequencies like static, the kind of transmission designed to resist jamming and spoofing. To an eavesdropper it looked like noise. To someone with the key it collapsed into information. Whatever was transmitting had changed tactics. It had learned the channel was hostile. Inside the spread spectrum pattern, Hannah found a timestamp reference, human, not cosmic. It pointed to 1997, to an anomaly buried in old radio astronomy archives and dismissed as equipment drift. Hannah and Elias dug through historical records until they found it. A brief narrowband handshake near the hydrogen line detected by an aging telescope, and quietly reclassified within hours. The same playbook. The same erasure. The same speed. First contact hadn't happened in 2037. It had happened decades earlier. And quiet services didn't begin erasing because of this signal. Quiet services existed because of it. In a dim equipment room, Leo finally stopped speaking like an operative and spoke like a man carrying a weight. In 1997, he said, humanity didn't respond with wonder. It responded with competition. One nation tried to jam the channel so nobody else could listen. Another tried to embed a coercive payload. Others argued over who had authority to answer at all. It became a contest. Who could own the first words Earth sent into a conversation that might shape history? Quiet services formed to monopolize the channel, not because secrecy was noble, but because leadership feared chaos. They believed if one controlled voice spoke for Earth, the species might avoid turning first contact into a global weapons program. They believed control was safer than democracy. Hannah asked if they ever answered. Leo hesitated, then admitted the truth. They responded once, long ago, and regretted it. And that regret was the third, final twist. The alien transmission wasn't a greeting. It was a safety test. A probe of our coordination, restraint, and capacity to behave as one coherent civilization. Our response in 1997, jamming, embedded threats, competing claims of authority, told them what they needed to know. The transmitter did something chillingly rational. It stopped talking. And it began recording. Quiet services didn't erase first contact to hide aliens from humanity. They erased it because the aliens had reason to hide from us. Now, in 2037, the signal had returned, not because we were ready, but because something in their observation cycle had come due, or because their automated protocol had reached the next stage. The spread spectrum design suggested a system that expected interference and had adapted. The waiting pattern that followed felt almost human in its patience. Pause, repeat, like a knock at a door from someone who would not force entry. Hannah held the raw buffer drive like it weighed more than metal. She faced the oldest dilemma in science, truth versus consequence. Publish the proof and ignite global chaos. Bury it and become what she despised, another hand on the erase button. Elias argued that time itself was evidence. If they continued lying, they'd lose the right to call themselves a learning species. Leo argued that contact wasn't just information. It was diplomacy with an unknown intelligence, and diplomacy collapses when the room is on fire. Then Hannah realized the only honest response wasn't a message. It was a demonstration. If the original contact was a safety test, then the first thing humanity needed to prove was that no single faction could own the microphone again. So Hannah leaked the buffer, not to social media and not to governments, but to every major scientific institution on Earth simultaneously. She sent cryptographic proofs, replication keys, the raw data, and the methodology needed to verify it independently. She made the evidence too distributed to erase, too public to monopolize, too redundant to bury under a rebuilt hash chain. Quiet services moved to stop it. They were too late. Data propagated faster than authority. And then, for the first time, humanity replied in the open. Not with a poem. Not with a flag. Not with a threat disguised as diplomacy. The Lunar Far Side Array broadcast a standardized handshake protocol near the hydrogen line, open source, verifiable, designed to be monitored by anyone on Earth, with explicit anti-weaponization constraints and a global consensus signature, proof that the planet had chosen transparency over control. The next part didn't happen quickly. That's the other lie stories tell. That contact is immediate. Across light years, a conversation is measured in decades. The reply would take years to arrive, and years more for an answer to return, if one returned at all. But the most important change happened instantly, right here, in the species doing the listening. Because the first contact we erased wasn't erased from the universe. It was erased from our responsibility. And the first contact we chose to remember wasn't about aliens at all. It was about whether we could stop erasing ourselves.